The massive holographic display at the center of the Galactic Coalition headquarters crackled with interference. Bright blue sparks danced across the projection as static filled the communication chamber. Ambassador Veltar of the Zavari colony leaned forward in his crystalline chair, his translucent skin growing dimmer with each passing moment. Something was terribly wrong. The transmission finally stabilized, revealing the panicked face of Elder Kewendao. His usually calm features were twisted with fear, and behind him emergency lights flashed red against the walls of what appeared to be an underground bunker. "This is Elder Kewendao of the Kepler 442c mining settlement." His voice crackled through the speakers, broken by bursts of static. "Unknown hostiles have entered our system. They consume everything they touch. Our energy shields are failing. The outer settlements are already gone. We have perhaps 2 rotations before they reach the main colony. Request immediate assistance. Repeat, we need." The transmission died abruptly, leaving only the soft hum of machinery in the silent chamber. Commander Thexal of the Coalition Defense Force stood before the tactical display, his 6 arms moving rapidly as he manipulated the holographic interface. Data streams flowed across the screen showing star charts, fleet positions and damage reports. His expression grew darker with each piece of information he reviewed. "What exactly are these devourers?" Ambassador Veltar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His crystalline skin had faded to a pale gray, a sure sign of deep worry among his species. Thexal's primary arms gestured at the tactical display while his secondary arms continued working the controls. "Something we have never encountered before," he replied grimly. "Our intelligence suggests they appeared from the outer rim of the galaxy just 3 cycles ago. Since then they have consumed 7 star systems completely." The display shifted to show recorded battle footage from previous encounters. Massive ships that looked like a twisted combination of metal and living flesh moved through space with disturbing grace. When Coalition vessels fired their energy weapons at these creatures, something impossible happened. Instead of damaging the enemy ships, the weapons seemed to be absorbed into their hulls, making the Devourer vessels grow larger and more menacing. 12 different species have attempted rescue missions to various colonies under attack, Thexal continued, his voice heavy with defeat. The elegant Altarian cruisers, with their advanced plasma cannons, fled after losing half their fleet in the first engagement. The mighty Draknari warriors, feared across 3 sectors for their combat prowess, sent exactly 1 distress beacon before going completely silent. Even the technologically superior Nexari attempted an assault with their most advanced vessels. None returned. Veltar studied the battle recordings with growing horror. Ships that had taken decades to build were destroyed in minutes. Crews that represented the finest military minds in the galaxy were completely outmatched. The Devourers seemed to learn and adapt with each encounter, becoming stronger and more dangerous. "How do they do it?" asked Counselor Zephin from across the chamber. "How do they absorb our weapons?" "We believe their ships are partially biological," Thexal explained. "They appear to convert energy directly into mass, growing stronger with each attack. Our conventional tactics are completely useless against them. Energy weapons feed them. Projectile weapons bounce off their adaptive hulls. Even our most powerful explosives seem to have minimal effect." The council chamber fell into an uncomfortable silence. Around the circular room, representatives from dozens of species sat in their specialized chairs and environmental suits, each lost in their own thoughts. The coalition had been formed to protect member worlds from exactly this type of threat, but they were powerless against an enemy that turned their own strength against them. Abandoning an entire colony went against everything the coalition stood for. Their charter required them to protect all member species, regardless of the cost. But sending more ships and crews to certain death seemed equally wrong. They were facing an impossible choice. "What about the humans?" Counselor Zephin suggested hesitantly, breaking the long silence. A collective shudder ran through the assembled delegates. Several representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged worried glances. The humans were the coalition's newest members, having joined less than 2 standard cycles ago, and they were by far the most unsettling. "The humans?" Thexal repeated slowly as if testing the words. "Yes, they are different." Everyone in the chamber knew the stories. Unlike every other species in the coalition, humans had evolved from predator stock. While most civilized races had developed from prey animals or peaceful herbivores, humans were apex hunters from a world filled with dangerous creatures. Their approach to warfare was considered barbaric by galactic standards. They used deception, surprise attacks, and tactics that other species found dishonorable. They are our last option, Thexal admitted reluctantly. Though I seriously doubt even they would accept what amounts to a suicide mission. The humans may be aggressive, but they are not stupid. They must realize that sending their fleet against the Devourers would mean certain destruction. Ambassador Veltar looked around the chamber at the faces of his colleagues. Fear, desperation, and hopelessness were written clearly on every alien feature. 40,000 Zavari civilians were about to die, and the greatest military alliance in galactic history was powerless to save them. Contact Earth, he said finally. We have to try. Deep within the Coalition archives on Nexus Prime, thousands of data files contain detailed reports about humanity's military encounters with other species. The records painted a disturbing picture that made even the bravest Coalition officers uncomfortable. Each file told the same story in different words. Humans fought unlike any other civilized species in the galaxy. The Calorians, a peaceful race of traders known for their calm negotiations and fair business practices, had been the first to document what they called psychological warfare. Their report, filed 3 cycles ago, described a human tactic that still made Coalition strategists shudder. During a border conflict, human forces had captured enemy communications and broadcast the death screams of fallen soldiers back to their own armies. The psychological impact had been so devastating that entire Calorian defense units had surrendered without firing a shot. They weaponized fear itself, the Calorian commander had written in his official report. We could not understand how any civilized species could be so cruel to their enemies even in war. The proud Vortak military had experienced something even worse. Known throughout 3 sectors as honorable warriors who fought face-to-face battles with traditional weapons, the Vortak had expected humans to follow similar rules of engagement. Instead, human forces had pretended to retreat from a mountain stronghold, drawing the Vortak army into narrow canyon passages. Once the enemy was trapped, the humans had used mining explosives to collapse the tunnel systems, burying entire Vortak divisions underground. They have no concept of honorable combat, the Vortak general had reported. They use deception as naturally as we breathe. Victory matters more to them than dignity. Captain Raxin of the Altarian Navy had written perhaps the most detailed analysis of human military tactics. His report had become required reading at Coalition military academies, not as an example to follow, but as a warning about what humans were capable of. Humans do not fight with honor, his report stated clearly. They fight to win using methods that would shame a scavenger. They turn mining equipment into weapons, use civilian vessels as warships, and employ tactics that would make a pirate blush. Most disturbing of all, they seem to enjoy the challenge of impossible odds. The file included security footage from various conflicts showing humans converting industrial mining lasers into ship-mounted weapons, using cargo freighters as ramming vessels, and employing civilian engineers as combat specialists. What shocked Coalition observers most was not just the effectiveness of these improvised tactics, but the enthusiasm with which humans embraced them. But the archives also contained other types of reports that painted a different picture of humanity. There were records of human colonies that had held out against impossible odds to protect alien refugees. Stories of human rescue ships that had arrived at disaster sites faster than any other Coalition vessels, often risking their own safety to save complete strangers. Reports of human soldiers who had fought and died protecting species they had never met before. One particular file told the story of the Zephyrian plague outbreak, where human medical teams had worked for months without rest to develop a cure for an alien disease that could not even affect humans. Another described how human engineers had volunteered to manually repair a failing space station reactor, knowing the radiation would likely kill them, to save 3,000 alien civilians. They are contradictions, one Coalition psychologist had written. Savage in war, compassionate in peace. They will destroy their enemies without mercy, then risk everything to save complete strangers. On Earth, in the underground command center beneath Geneva, Fleet Admiral Park Juno stood before a massive holographic display showing the galaxy-wide situation. The Coalition's emergency transmission had reached Earth just hours after being sent, and already the human military leadership was gathered for an emergency planning session. Admiral Kim Mina, the head of tactical planning, read the mission parameters aloud from her datapad. Biological entities consuming entire worlds. Energy absorption capability confirmed. 12 Coalition fleets destroyed or routed with minimal enemy losses. No known weaknesses identified. The other admirals listened in silence as she continued. Target location, Kepler 442c mining colony. Estimated civilian population, 40,000 Zavari. Estimated time before total colony destruction, Less than 2 standard days. Admiral Lee Taeho, commander of the 3rd Fleet, looked up from his own analysis. What about survival probability for any rescue mission? Admiral Yang Soo-young, the coalition's top strategic analyst among the human command, checked her calculations one more time before answering. Near zero by conventional military metrics. Every species that has engaged these devourers has been either destroyed or forced to retreat. Their technology appears specifically designed to counter standard coalition warfare tactics. The room fell silent as the admirals considered the implications. This was clearly a suicide mission disguised as a rescue operation. The coalition was asking humanity to sacrifice their fleet and crews for a colony they had never even visited, against an enemy that had already proven unbeatable. Fleet Admiral Park Juno studied the tactical displays for several long minutes, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up at his fellow officers with a grim smile that would have terrified any coalition diplomat who saw it. "Good thing we're not conventional," he said simply. "Signal the coalition immediately. Tell them we accept the mission and that the human fleet is already preparing for departure. We'll be en route within 6 hours." The other admirals nodded in agreement, their faces showing the same mix of determination and anticipation that had made humanity feared across the galaxy. The swirling vortex of hyperspace collapsed as the human fleet emerged into normal space above Kepler 442c. What materialized from the dimensional rift looked nothing like the sleek, elegant vessels that other coalition species used for military operations. Instead of polished hulls and graceful designs, the human fleet appeared to be a collection of industrial ships that someone had hastily converted for war. Converted cargo haulers dominated the formation, their flat surfaces now bristling with improvised weapon systems that had clearly been bolted on as an afterthought. Massive mining ships, originally designed to strip asteroids of valuable minerals, had been retrofitted with military-grade shield generators that created flickering energy barriers around their hulls. Even civilian passenger transports had been pressed into service, their once pristine hulls now decorated with aggressive war paint in bright reds and yellows, along with slogans written in multiple human languages. The largest vessel in the formation was unmistakably the flagship, though it looked more like a flying factory than a warship. The ship's hull bore the name Indomitable in bold letters, but anyone familiar with industrial vessels would recognize it as a former asteroid mining platform. What made it terrifying was not its appearance, but the massive weapons that had been mounted along its superstructure. Energy cannons designed for breaking apart mountains now pointed toward enemy targets, while missile batteries originally used for controlled demolition had been converted for ship-to-ship combat. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Choi Jin-woo stood before the main view screen with his hands clasped behind his back. He was a tall man with graying hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His uniform was practical rather than decorative, and his expression showed the kind of confidence that came from years of making difficult decisions under pressure. Lieutenant Han Yejin sat at the tactical station, her fingers dancing across the control interface as she analyzed the sensor readings from the enemy fleet. She was young for her position, but her reputation for tactical analysis had earned her a place on the flagship bridge during this critical mission. 18 enemy vessels detected, she reported in a clear, professional voice. Confirming biomechanical composition from previous intelligence reports. Energy absorption capability is definitely active. I'm reading power signatures that fluctuate as they absorb attacks from the colony's defense platforms. Captain Choi nodded slowly, processing this information. What is the current status of the Zavari colony? Commander Kang Hyun-woo looked up from the communication station where he had been monitoring multiple channels simultaneously. 40,000 civilians confirmed still alive, sir. However, their energy shields are failing rapidly. Based on current power drain rates, they have perhaps 6 hours before complete shield collapse. Through the main view screen, the enemy fleet was clearly visible against the backdrop of space. The Devourer ships were unlike anything in the Coalition databases. They appeared to be twisted combinations of metal and living tissue that pulsed with an organic rhythm. The hulls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting slowly as if the ships themselves were alive. Energy weapons from the desperately defending Zavari defense platforms struck the enemy vessels continuously, but instead of causing damage, the attacks were simply absorbed into the biomechanical hulls, making the Devourer ships grow visibly larger and more threatening. Fascinating, Captain Choi observed quietly. They have evolved to counter every conventional military tactic used by coalition forces. Energy weapons feed them. Traditional explosives probably bounce off their adaptive armor. They have turned our own weapons into their strength. He paused for a moment, studying the alien vessels with the analytical mind of a career military officer. But they have made one critical error in their evolution. Lieutenant Han looked up from her station with curiosity. Sir? They have never fought humans before, Captain Choi said with a grim smile. That will be their mistake. He moved to the communication console and opened a channel to the entire human fleet. His voice carried clearly to every ship in the formation, reaching captains and crew members who were already preparing for what everyone knew would be an unconventional battle. All vessels, this is Captain Choi, he announced. Analysis confirms that these creatures eat energy and grow stronger from conventional attacks. They have adapted to defeat every military tactic used by civilized coalition forces. He paused to let this information sink in. Therefore, we will not use conventional attacks. All ships are authorized to initiate Protocol Chaos immediately. Throughout the human fleet, crews began implementing tactics that would have horrified any other species in the galaxy. In the cargo holds of converted freighters, engineers loaded nuclear waste into kamikaze drones that would poison rather than destroy their targets. Computer specialists uploaded experimental viruses designed specifically to corrupt biomechanical systems into penetration warheads that would deliver the digital weapons directly into enemy hulls. Mining ships began preparing their most dangerous tools for combat use. Industrial charges that were normally used for controlled demolition of asteroids were being rigged to create massive kinetic impact weapons. Drilling equipment was being converted into close-range assault weapons. Even the civilian transports were being loaded with improvised explosives and preparing for ramming attacks if necessary. The Devourers had conquered dozens of species across multiple sectors by adapting to their predictable, honorable fighting styles. Every coalition military academy taught the same basic principles of warfare: maintain formation, use overwhelming firepower, protect civilian populations, and follow established rules of engagement. They had never encountered an enemy that considered rules to be suggestions and viewed unconventional tactics as standard operating procedure. They had never faced a species that refused to fight fair and seemed to thrive on turning desperate situations into opportunities for creative destruction. The space above Kepler 442c fell into an eerie silence as the two fleets faced each other across the void. The Devourer ships hung motionless, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with alien life as they waited for the humans to make the first move. Every previous encounter had followed the same pattern. Enemy fleets would charge forward with energy weapons blazing, only to feed the Devourers and make them stronger. But the human fleet did something completely unexpected. Instead of forming battle lines or charging into combat, the ships suddenly scattered in all directions like a school of fish fleeing from a predator. The converted cargo haulers, mining vessels, and civilian transports broke formation and began racing away from the Devourer fleet at maximum speed, their engines glowing bright blue as they pushed their reactors to the limit. To any observer, it looked like the humans had taken one look at the enemy and decided to run rather than fight. The chaotic retreat appeared to confirm what many coalition species had suspected. Humans were aggressive when facing weaker opponents, but would flee when confronted with superior force. The Devourers, confident in their overwhelming superiority after defeating 12 coalition fleets, immediately gave chase. Their biomechanical ships surged forward, moving through space with the fluid grace of living creatures. They had seen this reaction before from other species. First came fear, then flight, then inevitable capture and consumption. It was exactly what the humans had been counting on. Captain Choi watched the tactical display from the bridge of the Indomitable, waiting for the perfect moment as the enemy ships spread out to pursue his scattered fleet. The Devourers were following their instincts, just as human military psychologists had predicted they would. Now, he whispered into his communication device. Across the scattered human fleet, the fleeing ships suddenly executed a coordinated maneuver that would have been impossible without precise timing and months of practice. Every vessel simultaneously reversed course, their engines switching from flight mode to attack configuration in a matter of seconds. The humans had not been running away. They had been drawing the enemy into a trap. The converted freighter Determination, commanded by Captain Oh Sung-won, led the counterattack. His ship had been fleeing directly away from 3 pursuing Devourer vessels when it suddenly spun around and accelerated straight toward them. Instead of firing energy weapons that the creatures could absorb, the Determination launched clouds of metallic chaff mixed with radioactive particles from its cargo holds. The Devourers, following their evolved instincts, immediately tried to absorb this new attack, just as they had absorbed every previous weapon fired at them. Their biomechanical systems opened to draw in what appeared to be harmless metal debris. The nuclear waste hidden within the chaff began working immediately. The radioactive particles poisoned the Devourer's biological components, causing violent convulsions to run through their hulls. The creatures that had grown stronger from every previous attack suddenly found themselves weakened and sick from absorbing something their systems could not process. Commander Park Minji watched from the bridge of her converted mining vessel, the Perseverance, as the enemy ships began showing signs of distress. Her tactical officer reported that the Devourer's energy signatures were fluctuating wildly, indicating serious internal damage. "Second wave, attack now while they are weakened," she ordered over the fleet communication channel. Her ship had originally been designed for asteroid mining operations in the outer system, equipped with industrial cutting lasers powerful enough to slice through solid rock. Those same lasers, now retargeted for combat use, proved devastatingly effective against Devourer hulls that had been weakened by radiation poisoning. The brilliant white beams cut deep into the biomechanical armor, causing the enemy ships to writhe in apparent pain. Unlike energy weapons that the creatures could absorb and convert to strength, the focused cutting lasers created precise damage that their systems could not heal or adapt to quickly enough. "Engineering, can you overload Reactor 3? Commander Park called down to her engine room as she watched 3 Devourer ships closing in on her position. The response came immediately from Chief Engineer Im Suho, his voice calm despite the desperate situation. "Yes, Captain, we can create a controlled overload. But the ship will not survive the explosion." Park looked around at her bridge crew, seeing the same determination in their faces that had made humanity feared across the galaxy. They all understood what she was planning and none of them objected. "That is exactly the idea," she replied. "All hands abandon ship. Get to the escape pods immediately." Throughout the Perseverance, emergency alarms began sounding as the crew evacuated to escape pods. The mining vessel continued its attack run toward the largest Devourer ship while Chief Engineer Im carefully adjusted the reactor settings to create a massive overload. The enemy tried to absorb the energy from the overloading reactor, but the human engineer had designed the explosion to produce far more power than their biological systems could handle. When the Perseverance finally detonated, the blast tore through 3 Devourer ships and severely damaged 2 others. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out as human crews implemented tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. Ships that had been designed for peaceful purposes were being used as weapons themselves. Crews were sacrificing their vessels and sometimes their lives to achieve objectives that traditional military thinking would consider impossible. The Devourers, having conquered advanced civilizations through their ability to adapt to conventional tactics, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to be conventional. The space battle above Kepler 442c ended as suddenly as it had begun. The surviving Devourer ships, badly damaged and unable to adapt to human tactics they had never encountered, fled into the darkness of deep space. Their biomechanical hulls, once pulsing with confident strength, now flickered weakly as they retreated from an enemy that had proven impossible to understand or defeat. As the last enemy vessel disappeared into hyperspace, the human fleet immediately switched from combat mode to rescue operations. The same ships that had moments before been launching suicide attacks and using radiation poisoning as a weapon now moved with careful precision toward the failing Zavari colony. The medical ships, which had originally been civilian passenger liners designed for comfortable travel between Earth colonies, opened their cargo bays to receive wounded aliens. Their luxury passenger compartments were quickly converted into emergency treatment centers. Human doctors and nurses worked alongside alien medical equipment they had never seen before, learning how to treat injuries in species they had only read about in textbooks. Cargo vessels that normally transported mining equipment and industrial supplies now loaded thousands of Zavari refugees. The alien families climbed aboard human ships with their few remaining possessions, looking around in wonder at the strange markings and unfamiliar technology that surrounded them. Even the military transports joined the evacuation effort, their weapon systems powered down as they focused entirely on saving lives. Human crew members helped elderly Zavari climb the loading ramps, carried injured children to medical stations, and distributed emergency food supplies without regard for the fact that they were depleting their own reserves. Elder Kewendal of the Zavari colony found himself aboard the human flagship, the Indomitable, watching in complete amazement as the evacuation proceeded. Everything he had heard about humans suggested they were violent, aggressive creatures who cared only about fighting and conquest. Yet here he saw something completely different. Human crew members were giving up their own sleeping quarters so that injured Zavari could have comfortable places to recover. They shared their personal food rations with refugee families, even though this meant they would have less to eat during the long journey to safety. Engineers worked around the clock to repair damaged Zavari equipment, staying awake for days without complaint to help people they had never met before. The elder watched a human technician carefully adjusting a Zavari medical device, his hands moving with gentle precision as he calibrated the alien technology. The same hands that had helped load nuclear waste into weapons just hours earlier now worked to save lives with infinite care. "I do not understand this," Kewendal said to Captain Choi as they stood together in the Indomitable's medical bay. Around them, human medical staff treated wounded Zavari with equipment that had been hastily modified to work with alien physiology. "Your species is feared across the galaxy as savage warriors who know only violence. Yet here I see you tending to our wounded with such gentleness and compassion." Captain Choi looked up from where he was helping a young Zavari engineer calibrate a medical scanner that had been damaged during the attack. His military uniform was torn and stained from the battle, his face streaked with sweat and grease from hours of emergency repairs, but his eyes showed only kindness as he looked at the alien refugees. "Fear and respect often look exactly the same from a distance," he replied thoughtfully. "Other species see our military actions and assume we are naturally violent. But they do not understand why we fight." He paused to help the Zavari engineer adjust a complex setting on the medical device. "We fight so that others do not have to. We are savage when we need to be, gentle when we can be." Elder Kewendal struggled to understand this contradiction. "But why would you do this? Why would your people risk everything for complete strangers? We are not even the same species. We have never met before today. Your government will receive no payment for this rescue. Your people gain nothing from helping us." Nearby, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Shin Minsik looked up from where he was treating a wounded Zavari child. The little alien had been injured when the colony's shields failed, and the human doctor had been working for hours to repair the damage using a combination of human and Zavari medical techniques. "Because when someone calls for help, you answer," Dr. Shin said simply. "It does not matter if they are human or alien, friend or stranger, rich or poor. When people are in danger and they ask for help, decent beings respond. That is what separates civilization from the empty void of space." Lieutenant Commander Nam Gaeong, who was coordinating the evacuation from the bridge, added her own thoughts as she passed by carrying supplies to the medical bay. "Besides, someone has to stand guard against the darkness. Someone has to be willing to fight the monsters that threaten innocent people. It might as well be us." The words echoed through the medical bay, and Elder Kewendal began to understand something important about humanity. They were not savage because they enjoyed violence. They were savage because they were willing to become monsters to protect those who could not protect themselves. As the human fleet prepared to escort the Zavari refugees to safety, word of their victory began spreading throughout the coalition. The species that had once whispered fearfully about human brutality now spoke of something different: human guardianship. The Devourers had learned a painful lesson that day. In a galaxy filled with civilized species that fought with honor and restraint, sometimes it took those willing to abandon all rules to protect those who could not abandon their principles.